The morning sun rose over Earth, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. But inside the United Nations building in New York, the light felt cold and cruel. Captain Ji-ho stood before the great assembly, his uniform perfect, his face calm, but his hands shook slightly as he gripped the edge of the desk. The message had come 3 days ago. The Xyarthian collective had arrived at Earth's borders, their ships so large that they blocked out the sun when they hung in the sky above major cities. Their demands were simple and impossible. Earth would surrender 50% of its human population as indentured servants, or the planet would be destroyed. 300 years ago, Earth had faced a terrible plague. Millions of people died. The world was close to ending. Then, the Xyarthian collective came. They arrived with medicine and technology that saved billions of lives. The Earth governments were grateful. They signed agreements and contracts without reading them carefully. Young nations did not understand the fine print. No one thought about what would happen 300 years later. Now, the bill had come due. Ji-ho looked at the faces around him. Presidents, generals, scientists, and leaders from every nation on Earth sat in shocked silence. Some cried, some looked angry, some simply stared at nothing, trying to understand a world that made no sense anymore. "How long do we have?" asked President Chen from America. Her voice was very small. 8 weeks, Ji-ho replied. The words felt like stones falling from his mouth. They want the first group transported to their ships in 8 weeks. The selection process must begin immediately. The room exploded. People shouted. Some demanded war. Others suggested surrender. A few proposed lottery systems to decide who would be taken. An old man from Africa stood up and said that his country would never give up its people. A woman from Europe argued that perhaps slavery was better than death. Ji-ho listened to all of it. He understood their fear because he felt it too. But fear was not a solution. Fear was a disease that would spread through humanity like the plague of 300 years ago. When the noise finally quieted, Ji-ho spoke again. The collective believes we will accept this because we have no choice. They think we are weak. They think we will select lottery numbers and pray for mercy. They are wrong. "What do you suggest?" asked an Indian general. "We cannot fight them. Our weapons are children's toys compared to their technology." "No," Ji-ho agreed. "We cannot fight them with weapons, but we can fight them with our minds." He pulled out a data drive. It contained the names of 400 people: scientists, engineers, soldiers, tacticians, and thinkers. Some were the best their nations had to offer. Others were unknown, working in small laboratories or hidden factories. All of them had one thing in common. They refused to accept death. "I want to propose something different," Ji-ho continued. "Instead of selecting who to give to the collective, we prepare to take what they have. We use the next 8 weeks not to cry and pray, but to work. We build weapons, we study their ships, we learn their patterns, we prepare for war." The room became absolutely quiet. A Russian scientist named Dr. Petrov stood up. He was old, with white hair and tired eyes. "Captain Ji-ho, this is suicide. The collective has technology we cannot imagine. They have weapons that could destroy our cities with a single shot. They have armor that our missiles cannot touch." "Yes," Ji-ho nodded. "All of that is true, which is why we will not fight them the way they expect. We will fight them the way only humans can. We will use tricks. We will use creativity. We will use the one thing they lack because they have been powerful for too long. We will use desperation." Dr. Park Mi-sun, a young physicist from South Korea, raised her hand. She was brilliant, but had spent her whole life studying theoretical problems that seemed useless. Now, those problems might save the world. "What would you have me do?" she asked. "I need you to build a computer system that can predict their movements, a quantum system that works in ways their technology does not expect." Can you do this? Dr. Park thought for a moment. Her heart beat very fast. I think so. It would take time. It would take resources. You have 8 weeks, Jiho said. It is enough. Next, he called for engineer Teo, a man from the same country as Dr. Park. Teo was only 28 years old, but he had already designed weapons and defense systems that had impressed military leaders around the world. He was quiet and serious, and he thought in ways that made other people see solutions they had missed. I need weapons, Jiho told him. Not weapons that copy what the collective has. I need weapons that use human creativity. Weapons that can turn their advantages into weaknesses. Weapons that can make a small force defeat a large one. Teo's eyes grew bright with understanding. Psychological warfare, misdirection, things that work because the enemy does not expect them. Exactly, Jiho said. Through the night, plans began to form. Messages went out to every hidden research facility on Earth. Scientists who had been working on strange projects suddenly found themselves with unlimited resources and permission to think in ways they had never been allowed to think before. On the colonies in space, a young soldier named HFY received new orders. She was told to begin recruiting volunteers for a special military division. When she asked what this division would do, she was told simply, save humanity. HFY had grown up in the colonies. She had never breathed real air or felt real rain. The Earth to her was a place she had seen only in videos, but she was human, and humans fought when their existence was threatened. Over the next 3 days, 50 million soldiers volunteered. They came from every nation, every background, every belief system. Soldiers stood next to musicians, teachers trained beside mechanics, old people fought to be included. Young people stepped forward without hesitation. Jiho watched it all happen and felt something he had not expected to feel. Hope. The Xerthian collective watched too, from their massive ships in orbit. They saw the panic and the chaos. They saw nations arguing. They saw people crying. They saw exactly what they had expected to see, a species that would break under pressure. They did not see the scientists working in hidden places. They did not see the weapons being built. They did not see the 50 million soldiers preparing for something they had never faced before. The collective's commander sent a message to Jiho. It was simple. Begin the selection process. Prepare your people for transport. This will be your final warning. Jiho sent back a response. We accept your terms. We will prepare. But in secret, he smiled. The collective had given him exactly what he needed. They had given him 8 weeks. And 8 weeks was enough time to prepare a surprise that would shake the galaxy. Deep beneath the mountains of South Korea, in a facility that officially did not exist, Engineer Teo stood before a wall covered in drawings and plans. His eyes had not closed in 36 hours. Coffee cups lay scattered across tables like fallen soldiers, but his mind was alive with possibility. He had been given an impossible task: create weapons that could defeat an enemy whose technology was centuries ahead of humanity's. The rational part of his brain said this was impossible, but Teo had learned long ago that the rational mind was only one tool. True creation came from somewhere deeper, somewhere that did not care about what was possible. He thought about how humans fought throughout history. Before guns, humans used arrows and spears. Before that, they used rocks and sticks. Every time the enemy had better weapons, humans found ways to win anyway. They used terrain. They used deception. They used speed and cunning. They understood that a small army could defeat a large army if it was smarter and faster. The Xerthian collective had power. They had technology. But they had something else. They had never been truly desperate. Power for too long makes you slow. Confidence makes you careless. Teo began to design weapons that the collective would have never imagined. Not weapons of enormous power, but weapons of precision and misdirection. He designed systems that would create false signals in enemy sensors. He created weapons that used old human tactics from ancient warfare, but powered by modern technology. He designed traps and tricks that would confuse and delay and ultimately destroy a far more powerful enemy. In another facility, hundreds of kilometers away, Dr. Park Mi-sun was working on something equally important. She sat before a massive computer, typing code that would exist in quantum states. Code that was both true and false at the same time until observed. Code that could predict probability in ways that standard computers simply could not. The Xeoearthian Collective relied on advanced prediction technology. They could forecast enemy movements with 95% accuracy. But Dr. Park was building something different. She was building quantum prediction that could see patterns invisible to classical systems. It would allow humans to know where the collective would attack before the collective commanders themselves knew it. Her team worked in shifts, but Dr. Park never left. She would sometimes fall asleep at her desk, her face pressed against the keyboard. When she woke, she would continue as if she had never stopped. Her colleagues worried about her health, but they said nothing. Everyone understood that if they failed, health would not matter anymore. In orbit above Earth, HFY trained her soldiers. She had been given a battalion of 5,000 troops. Most of them had never seen real combat. Some were teenagers who had grown up in the colonies, knowing nothing but zero gravity and metal walls. But they trained without complaint. They ran simulations of battles they might never fight. They learned tactics from an age before space travel existed. HFY was different from most soldiers. She was quieter. She thought before acting. In combat simulations, she always won, not because she was the most powerful, but because she was the most creative. She found solutions that other soldiers never considered. The military had noticed this years ago and trained her to lead others. Now, in the face of possible extinction, HFY became something more than a soldier. She became a symbol of human refusal to give up. Her battalion noticed this. They began to follow her with an intensity that surprised even the hardened military commanders. They knew that HFY would not ask them to do anything she would not do herself. They knew that if she said they could win, they had a chance. Meanwhile, on the surface of Earth, the false surrender continued. Governments created lists of people to be taken. News broadcasts showed chaos and despair. The Xeoearthian Collective watched with satisfaction. They had seen this pattern before, on dozens of worlds, a species receiving an impossible demand, the panic, the breakdown of society, the eventual surrender. But they did not see the truth. They did not see that the lists were filled with volunteers and criminals, not actual people randomly selected. They did not see that peaceful protests were actually cover for the movement of military equipment. They did not see that the breakdown of society was carefully choreographed chaos meant to hide their true preparations. Captain Jiho orchestrated all of this from a command center hidden deep underground. He had military commanders from every nation on Earth working together. For the first time in human history, all of humanity's military resources were pointed in the same direction, toward one goal, toward survival. Jiho studied every piece of information they had about the Xeoearthian Collective. He watched recordings of their ships. He analyzed their communication patterns. He tried to think like a commander who had conquered countless worlds. What would they expect? What would they not expect? He came to a realization that chilled him. The collective expected surrender. This expectation was their weakness. They had built their whole strategy around the assumption that humans would be afraid enough to surrender. If humans did not surrender, the collective's entire plan would break apart. But there was something else. The collective had to be careful too. They could destroy Earth easily, but they wanted the population alive. Dead slaves were useless, so they would not use their most destructive weapons. This was the opening that humans needed. A young intelligence analyst named Kyung Jae made a discovery that would change everything. He was digging through old records looking for information about the original plague and the original debt. What he found made him stare at his screen for an hour without moving. The records were false. The debt that the collective was collecting on had never actually existed. The plague had been terrible, yes, but the aid the collective had given was not a loan. It was marked in their old documents as humanitarian assistance, given freely without expectation of repayment. Somewhere between 300 years ago and now, someone had falsified the records. Someone had created a debt out of nothing. Kyung-jae knew this information was dangerous. If the public learned the truth now, they might lose the will to continue preparing for war. Hope could be as dangerous as despair. So he took the information to Captain Ji-ho, and only to Captain Ji-ho. "This changes everything," Kyung-jae said quietly. "No," Ji-ho replied. "This changes nothing about what we must do now. But it changes everything about what we will do when we win." As the weeks passed, humanity transformed. Factories that had made consumer goods began making weapons. Schools became training centers. Laboratories worked on problems they had never studied before. 50 million soldiers prepared for battle. Scientists worked in hidden facilities. The entire species moved with singular purpose. The Xerthian collective watched and waited. In their minds, they had already won. Humans had never resisted before. There was no reason to think they would resist now. They had given the command and humans would obey. This was the way of the galaxy. What the collective did not understand was that they were not dealing with a species that had been conquered before. They were dealing with a species that had fought for survival through the entire history of their existence. They were dealing with humans who had nothing left to lose, and they had 8 weeks to prepare a surprise that would change the galaxy forever. The space station hung in darkness, a small outpost at the edge of Earth's territory. It was named Defense 1, and it was the first line of defense between Earth and the stars. For years, it had been quiet, a place where soldiers played chess and looked at the nothing of space. Now, it was a graveyard waiting to happen. Haewon stood on the observation deck and watched the Xerthian fleet approach. There were thousands of ships. They were so large that they seemed unreal, like nightmares given form. The smallest of their vessels could destroy this entire station with a single weapon discharge. She knew this. Her soldiers knew this. And yet, they were ready. The communication system crackled to life. A voice came through, smooth and cold, speaking in perfect human language. "This is the Xerthian Collective First Command. Prepare for transport operations. Your people will board our vessels within the hour." Ji-ho's voice came back, calm and accepting. "Understood. We are preparing the first group of 50,000 humans for transport. They will be ready." Haewon watched as the first transport ships began to move toward the station. They moved with confidence, with no concern for resistance. Why would they be concerned? They had faced this situation on 100 worlds. Species always surrendered when their world was under threat. But Haewon was not thinking about surrender. She was thinking about the signal. Engineer Tayo sat at a console far below the surface of Earth, his fingers poised over a button. Around him, hundreds of technicians watched screens that displayed the position of every Xerthian vessel. When the transport ships came within range, when they were close enough that they could not escape, then the signal would come. "All units, stand by!" Ji-ho's voice crackled through every communication channel. "Prepare to execute Operation Humanity. This is not a drill. This is not a simulation. When you receive the signal, you act. No hesitation. No mercy. These are the only moments where we will have the advantage of surprise. We must be perfect." Haewon felt her heart beat in her chest like a drum of war. This was the moment. Everything they had prepared for, everything that soldiers dream about but hope never happens. Signal received. Teo spoke quietly. "All units, execute." The first attack came from the station itself. Weapons that had been hidden in the structure suddenly powered up and fired. The attacks were not massive. They did not destroy the transport ships. But they hit the ships with precision, striking at specific points where Dr. Park Mi-sun's quantum computers had calculated the enemy would be vulnerable. The first transport ship's weapon system exploded. A second ship lost its communication ability. A third ship's sensors went dark. The Xeerthian collective commanders stared at their displays in shock. For several seconds, nothing happened. Their minds could not process what was occurring. Humans did not fight back. Humans surrendered. This was not supposed to happen. "Return fire," the collective commander ordered. "Destroy the station." But before they could execute the order, something strange occurred. The station seemed to disappear from their sensors. In reality, Teo's technology had created a false image. The Xeerthian weapons system locked onto the fake station and fired. The weapons hit nothing but empty space while the real station continued its assault. HFY watched as one of the Xeerthian transport ships was hit directly. Not by one weapon, but by 3 simultaneous attacks from different angles. The ship's shields were strong, but they were not designed to handle attacks from multiple directions at once. The ship began to move oddly, its engines damaged. In the moment of confusion, other weapons fired. Some came from the station. Others came from small human defense ships that had been hiding behind Earth's moon. Others came from orbital platforms that the Xeerthian scanners had not even detected. It was not a large battle. Humanity did not have the power to wage a large battle, but it was perfectly executed. It was a small knife placed exactly where it would do the most damage. The Xeerthian fleet, shocked by resistance, began to reorganize. But the damage was already done. 5 of their transport ships had been disabled. 3 others were badly damaged. Hundreds of soldiers were dead. For the first time in their long history, the Xeerthian collective had experienced unexpected defeat. The collective commander's pride turned to anger. "Destroy them all," he commanded. "Destroy the station. Destroy the ships. Destroy the entire planet if necessary." But then something happened that the commander had not expected. As the larger Xeerthian ships began to move into firing position, they were attacked again. This time by forces they had not even known existed. From hidden bases on Earth's moon, more weapons fired. From stations hidden in the asteroid belt, more attacks came. Humanity had spent 8 weeks preparing not just one line of defense, but many lines. Layer after layer of hidden weapons waited in the darkness of space. The Xeerthian collective had expected a simple collection operation. They received instead a carefully planned ambush. Every attack was designed not to destroy their entire fleet, but to damage it enough to prevent counterattack. Every weapon was positioned to create maximum chaos. HFY and her soldiers watched the Xeerthian ships fall, not all of them. The collective had power that was still immense, but the appearance of invincibility was shattered. Ships that seemed impossible to damage were being damaged. Weapons that seemed unstoppable were being stopped. "Enemy flagship engaging," a voice called out. "It's moving toward the station." The massive command ship of the Xeerthian collective was turning toward Defense 1. It was twice the size of anything humans had in space. Its weapons could reduce the entire station to ash. HFY understood that she was about to die. She understood that this moment was probably the end. But Jiho's voice came through her communicator. "All units, execute retreat sequence. HFY, evacuate the station, now." "What about the soldiers here?" HFY asked. "All soldiers are equipped with escape pods," Jiho replied. "We do not waste lives. Move." HFY's soldiers ran toward the evacuation areas. The station's systems began a countdown. As the Xeerthian flagship closed in, as its weapons began to charge, the station detached itself into hundreds of smaller segments. Each segment had its own engines. Each segment could move independently. The Xyarthian weapons fired. They destroyed the empty station structure. But by then, the soldiers were already gone, scattered across space in escape vessels, each one heading toward Earth with information about the battle. As Haywan's escape pod descended toward Earth, she looked back at the space above her homeworld. The Xyarthian fleet was retreating, not completely, not in surrender, but they were regrouping, trying to understand what had just happened. Jiho watched the battle reports come in. Human casualties were high. Nearly 5,000 soldiers had died, but the collective had lost far more, and more importantly, they had lost something that was far more valuable than any ship or weapon. They had lost the knowledge that they were invincible. In the galaxy, word began to spread. A species called humans, from a world called Earth, had fought back against the Xyarthian collective. They had won, not completely, not yet, but they had won the first battle. And if they could win once, they might win again. The day of reckoning had begun. The war spread across the galaxy like fire consuming dry wood. What began as a single battle at Defense 1 became multiple battles. What became multiple battles became a war that touched dozens of star systems. The Xyarthian collective, shocked by human resistance, began to throw more forces at Earth. But every action they took was known in advance because of Dr. Park Mi-sun's quantum prediction system. The system could predict enemy movements with 87% accuracy, 3 to 5 days before they happened. This was not perfect, but it was enough. Humans could position their forces to counter every attack. They could not win through power, but they could win through knowledge. Knowledge was a more powerful weapon than any warship. In the hidden command center beneath the mountains, Jiho studied maps of the galaxy. Markers showed where human forces were positioned. Different colored lines showed predicted collective movements. Every prediction had been accurate so far. Dr. Park's system was working better than anyone had hoped. "Report from Haywan's squadron," a technician said. "They engaged 3 collective warships near Jupiter. 2 are destroyed, 1 is badly damaged and retreating." Jiho nodded. This was the 3rd successful engagement this week. Humanity was winning. Not quickly, but they were winning. What was strange was the reaction from other species in the galaxy. The Xyarthian collective was not alone in the stars. There were hundreds of advanced civilizations. For thousands of years, these civilizations had accepted the collective's authority. They paid their taxes. They followed the collective's laws. They lived under the threat of the collective's weapons. But now, these species were watching humanity fight back. They were watching the collective lose battle after battle. And they were beginning to wonder if the collective's power was real or if it had simply been a story they had all believed for so long. On a world called Tir Ost, whose people had been under collective control for 500 years, a rebellion began. Tir Ostians rose up against the collective's representatives. The collective sent warships to crush the rebellion, but the ships never arrived. They were intercepted by human forces who had somehow known exactly where those ships would be. On another world, the crystalline beings of Zarketh refused to pay their taxes to the collective. When collective tax collectors arrived, they found the planet empty. Not dead, empty. The Zarkethians had hidden themselves. When the collective tried to force them out, they were attacked by human ships. The ships were small, but they were perfectly positioned. The tax collectors never made it home. One by one, world after world began to rebel. Some rebelled violently, others simply refused to cooperate. The collective's control, which had seemed absolute, began to crack like old ice in spring. Kyung-jae, the intelligence analyst, continued his research into the original debt. He discovered more lies. The collective had created false contracts with dozens of species. They had invented debts that had never existed. They had enslaved entire worlds based on falsified documents. He brought all his findings to Jiho. "Captain, when we win this war, the collective will never recover. The truth about their lies will spread throughout the galaxy." Every species they have enslaved will know that they were cheated. That is good, Jiho said. That is why we must win. But the cost of winning was terrible. Haywan's battalion, once 5,000 strong, was now down to 900 soldiers. The battles were constant. Some soldiers were killed in combat. Others were injured so badly that they could no longer fight. Many simply disappeared in the vast darkness of space, their ships lost to weapons fire or navigation errors. Haywan herself had been wounded twice. She wore a bandage on her left arm and had scars on her face and neck. But she did not request to be taken out of combat. She continued to lead her soldiers forward, knowing that each battle might be her last. She had learned in this war that humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the most technologically advanced, but they had something that the collective lacked. They had desperation. They had a reason to fight that went beyond conquest or power. They fought because if they did not fight, they would die. And humans would rather die fighting than die kneeling. In his command center, Jiho watched the reports come in from every battlefield. The Xyrthian collective was losing. Their once infinite resources were being consumed by the war. Their once invincible military was being slowly reduced, ship by ship, soldier by soldier. But something was bothering him. The collective was still too organized. They were still fighting with confidence. A species that was truly losing should be panicking by now. They should be making mistakes. But the collective was still executing carefully planned operations. Then he understood. The collective was not trying to win anymore. They were trying to buy time. "Alert all forces," Jiho commanded. "The collective is planning something. Dr. Park, analyze all their recent movements. What are they moving toward?" Dr. Park worked quickly. Her quantum computers processed billions of data points. After several minutes, her face became very pale. "They are converging on Earth," she said quietly. "All their remaining fleets are moving toward Earth. They will be in position in 48 hours. Jiho felt cold. They are going to destroy the planet. If we destroy Earth, we eliminate the source of human resistance, a collective commander had told his superiors hours before. Yes, we will lose 50 million slaves, but we will save our civilization. A dead slave is useless. But a living enemy is an existential threat. The order went out to every collective warship. Return to Earth. Burn the world. Kill everything. Jiho made a decision that would define him for all of history. He gathered all of Earth's remaining military assets and launched them at the approaching collective fleet. He did not try to defend Earth. He accepted that Earth would be attacked. Instead, he positioned his forces to intercept the collective warships before they could reach the planet. It meant sacrificing millions to save billions. It meant leaving Earth's cities defenseless. It meant that when the collective weapons came down, they would destroy cities and kill people who had been unable to evacuate. "Execute the plan," Jiho ordered, and 10 million soldiers moved forward to meet the approaching enemy. The battle that followed was the largest battle of the war. Human ships fought collective ships in a conflict that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. The darkness between planets lit up with weapons fire. Ships exploded. Soldiers died. And slowly, very slowly, the collective fleet was stopped. They did not reach Earth, not all of them. Some warships broke through the human line and descended toward the planet. They fired their weapons at cities and nations. Millions of people died in the flames. But the majority of the collective's remaining fleet was destroyed or disabled before they could deliver their destructive payload. The Earth survived. Wounded, burning in some places, but alive. And humanity, against all odds, had defeated the greatest threat to their existence. The Xyrthian collective had no more fleet. They had no more power. They had only the ruins of what they had been and the knowledge that they had been defeated by a species they had considered primitive. The war was nearly over. Now came the time for judgment. The conference room orbited a neutral station between the territories of humans and the remains of the Xyrthian collective. It was a place where many agreements had been signed, many disputes had been settled. Now it would be the place where a species accepted its defeat. Captain Ji-Ho sat on one side of the table. He was thinner than he had been at the start of the war. His face showed the weight of billions of lives lost. But his back was straight and his eyes were clear. Across from him sat the remaining leaders of the Xyrthian collective. They wore the same uniforms as before, but something in them had changed. The confidence was gone. The sense of absolute power had been replaced by something that looked like fear. "The terms are simple," Ji-Ho began. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "The Xyrthian collective will be dissolved. Your worlds will become independent. You will be allowed to govern yourselves, but under strict supervision from a newly formed Galactic Council." "And our fleets?" asked the collective's representative, a being with skin like polished stone and eyes that did not blink. "Your fleets will be dismantled," Ji-Ho replied. "The weapons will be stored safely. You will be allowed defensive forces only, no warships, no weapons of planetary destruction." The representative's expression did not change, but his hands moved slightly, showing his distress. "This is humiliation. This is not justice." "No," Ji-Ho agreed. "This is not justice. Justice would mean destroying your worlds completely. Justice would mean taking every member of the collective and putting them into slavery, the way you plan to do to us. Justice would mean pain and suffering lasting for generations." He paused and looked directly at the representative. "But humans are not like the collective. We are capable of something you are not capable of. We are capable of mercy." Dr. Park Misun and Tayo sat behind Ji-Ho listening. They had expected him to say something different. They had expected victory to be more aggressive, more harmful. They had not expected mercy. "There is one more thing," Kyung-jae said, stepping forward with documents in his hands. He had insisted on being here for this moment. "The Xyrthian collective owes reparations to every species that it has enslaved through false contracts and fabricated debts." He placed the documents on the table. They detailed the fraudulent history of the collective's rise to power. They showed how the organization had created false debts with dozens of species. They showed how lies had been used to build an empire. "Examine these records," Kyung-jae continued. "You will see that your power was built on dishonesty. The debt you claimed humanity owed was never real. It was created to control us." The representative looked at the documents. His expression shifted. For a moment, he appeared to be seeing his entire civilization's history in a new light. "We did not know," he said slowly. "Those records are from long before my time." "I did not know the debts were false." "It does not matter if you knew," Kyung-jae replied. "You are responsible now. You will make repairs. You will pay reparations to every world the collective has exploited." "That would bankrupt us," the representative said. "Yes," Ji-Ho agreed. "It will. That is appropriate. The collective has been rich from theft for thousands of years. Now you will pay back what you have stolen." The next hours contained the negotiation of the terms of surrender. The collective's representatives argued for lighter penalties. They requested exemptions and exceptions. But Ji-Ho remained firm. Not cruel, but firm. The terms were clear and would not change. As news of the negotiations spread through the galaxy, something remarkable happened. Species that had been oppressed by the collective for generations began to gather. Representatives from Tirost came. The crystalline beings of Zarketh sent delegations. Dozens of species arrived at the neutral station, all wanting to voice their own grievances and receive their own reparations. The Galactic Council that Ji-Ho spoke of was created quickly. It consisted of representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Humans had a seat of honor, not because they were superior to other species, but because they had shown that unity and desperation could defeat power and arrogance. HFY attended the ceremony where the Galactic Council was formally established. She wore a formal military uniform instead of combat gear. She had been promoted to general for her service in the war. But she did not feel proud. She felt tired. So many soldiers had died under her command. So many faces she would never forget. After the ceremony, HFY found her in a corridor. They sat together in silence for a moment. Two people who had seen the worst of war and the best of human nature. "We won," HFY said finally, "but I do not feel like we won." "That is because winning at this cost is not truly winning," HFY replied. "We survived. That is what matters. The species survived." "Do you think they will follow the terms?" HFY asked. "The collective?" "They will," HFY said. "They have no choice. But more than that, they will follow the terms because they now understand something. They understand that power without wisdom is fragile. They ruled for thousands of years by making species afraid of them. That fear is gone. Now, they must learn to rule themselves through different means." On the collective's homeworld, the population gathered to hear the terms of their surrender. Riots broke out in some places. There was anger and denial. But there was also something else. There was relief. For generations, the people of the collective had lived under the weight of maintaining an empire. Resources had been consumed by military spending. Entire generations had been trained only for war. Now, perhaps, things could be different. In every part of the galaxy, temples and prayer halls filled with beings of different species. They came to pray. Some prayed for the dead, some prayed for healing, and many prayed in gratitude that they had not been extinguished by a species that could have chosen complete revenge. The Xerthian collective, once the most feared power in the galaxy, had fallen. Not to a more powerful enemy, but to an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything and refuse to surrender. Not to an enemy that was more advanced, but to an enemy that was more clever. And as the news spread through the stars, a single truth became clear to every species in the galaxy. Never underestimate humans. Never assume they will surrender. Never believe that their weakness is permanent. Because when a human species decides to fight, when they decide that surrender is not an option, they will find a way. They will find courage in desperation. They will find wisdom in necessity. They will fight with everything they have. And against such a species, even the gods themselves would pray for mercy.